It wasn't simply another interstellar adventure, The Last Starfighter. It was the first movie to forego miniatures in favor of fully animated computer-generated dogfights, a risk that almost brought the entire production to a complete halt. But it was mayhem and pixels behind the starships and the arcade glow. By no means was the star we ended up with the first pick. One scene was so gloomy that it was toned down to earn a PG rating. As well as the director? At one point, he donned Michael Myers' mask. 20 strange facts about The Last Starfighter are listed below. A single high score transformed a gamer into the galaxy's final hope, lost in the gloom and the fear. The daydream that changed the future was more than simply science fiction. First place. The Last Starfighter's idea originated in an arcade's flashing lights rather than in a studio boardroom. While he saw a teenager chase a high score with his eyes fixed on the screen and perspiration on his brow, screenwriter Jonathan Betchell wondered, what if this wasn't simply a game? Could that have been a test? A tool for hiring? That idea formed the hook of the movie. After beating the game, Alex Rogan, a child from a trailer park, discovers it's a covert test to identify starfighters for a cosmic conflict. Even Universal was hesitant about the idea since it was so audacious, yet it was tough to ignore due to the early 1980s arcade mania. Batul's storyline transformed the passion of children feeding quarters into machines across America into their fate. A colorful screen, a joystick, and a high score. The gate to the stars was opened with just that. 2. Not always a trailer park youngster, Alex Rogan's story was originally set in a lush suburb with picket gates and well-kept lawns, but Universal was concerned that it seemed too similar to E.T., another stargazing lad next door. Thus, Jonathan Betchell, the scriptwriter, took a risk. He put Alex off in a trailer park that was dusty. It added depth to the film, grounded his family in working-class struggles, and produced a dramatic contrast when Alex abruptly found himself in the middle of cosmic conflicts and alien armadas. When he won at Starfighter, the trailer park's neighbors applauded, adding to the sense of camaraderie. Who regarded him as their own. He felt larger, more alone, and more heroic as he jumped into the stars from that tiny, grounded world. Alex was not fleeing the suburbs. He was fleeing monotony, poverty, and a seemingly unattainable future. The final Starfighter's heart and edge came from that setting. Although he wasn't the studio's initial choice, number 3 Lance Guest ended up becoming Alex Rogan. What a rising star who could help the movie become well-known. Although his sitcom schedule kept him locked in, Michael J. Fox was taken into consideration when his familial ties break out. Prior to landing Mask and briefly returning to the future, Eric Stoltz also underwent testing. Maggie's involvement was unclear as well. Before Catherine Mary Stewart got it, names like Jennifer Jason Leigh were floating about. Because of their unmistakable chemistry with Guest. Authenticity ultimately prevailed over the trendiest names. Stewart and Guest seemed credible together, even though they weren't yet celebrities. Stuck in a dead-end town, 2 infatuated kids are abruptly drawn into something far larger. The story was made authentic by the casting, not celebrity. 4th, Universal pursued James Cameron, a new filmmaker who had recently rocked Hollywood, before Nick Castle joined. Cameron was eager to work on his next major science fiction project after finishing The Terminator. It briefly appeared as though he would take over as director of The Last Starfighter, but schedule conflicts and Cameron's goals drew him elsewhere. Rather, he left Starfighter in Castle's care and plunged into Aliens and the Abyss. It's one of those intriguing hypothetical situations. Last Starfighter, which was directed by James Cameron, has the potential to be considerably more ambitious technically and darker, more gritty. Rather, the movie we saw struck a balance between innovative CGI and Nick Castle's utopian vision. The fork in history was a stark contrast to Cameron's signature intensity. Cameron created abyssal aliens and titans. Castle created a video game that became very popular. Did Chris Columbus express a desire to remain at home? No. What if the Wright brothers believed that people should only fly birds? Did Goloka believe that the Ulus were too unsightly to be saved? Who is Goloka? Never mind. 5th. Nick Castle was more than just The Last Starfighter's director. He was something else totally to horror enthusiasts. The man in the Halloween mask. John Carpenter had been friends with Castle in college. And Carpenter called Castle when he required a quiet, intimidating presence for Michael Myers. Castle became the Shape, one of the most iconic figures in horror, while hiding behind that mask. However, he took a jump of his own in 1984. From anonymous murderer to futuristic idealist, he substituted computer-generated starlight for Carpenter's shadows in The Last Starfighter, demonstrating his ability to transition between high-concept spectacle and scary simplicity. It gave the movie a unique pulse. Without a mask, the guy who previously frightened audiences now created a tale about destiny, love, and hope while pursuing the stars. 6th place. The majority of spacefights in 1984 were still filmed against starfields using miniatures, or model ships on wires. All of that was thrown out by The Last Starfighter. Rather, it took a chance on an unproven, fully functional computer graphics system. The movie lasts for 27 minutes. In Dogfight, almost all of the ships were constructed in machines rather than model shops. That device was one of just 6 Cray XMP supercomputers in existence. With more than 250,000 polygons each frame, much more than viewers had ever seen, the Gunstar appeared to be a digital fantasy taken directly from an arcade screen rather than a toy on strings. However, the miracle nearly fell apart. The computers almost choked when animators attempted to simulate the spinning Death Blossom, the Gunstar's ultimate weapon. The Cray was pushed to its breaking point by the whirl of light trails and explosions, constantly collapsing under the weight of its own desire. It was marketed by Hollywood as being quicker and less expensive than models. The reality? It hardly held together and was brittle and erratic. But in spite of everything, it succeeded. That risk changed the course of film history, opening the door for Terminator 2, Jurassic Park, and all subsequent virtual battlegrounds. The first shot of the CGI revolution in film was fired by the Gunstar, which did more than merely fire guns. Number 7. The power-hungry villain Jur was supposed to demonstrate his brutality in one gory manner. Live on a large monitor, by using his scepter to fry a spy's brain. The entire scene, glowy skin, quivering body, etc., was captured on camera. However, Nick Castle, the director, retracted it. The scene was cut down to nearly nothing, simply a red flash on the victim's forehead, to protect the PG ratings. What would have been one of the 1980s most sinister PG scenes disappeared into the editing room? The irony? Just a few weeks before the PG-13 rating was introduced, the final Starfighter was released. Castle could have preserved the entire scene if he had waited. Rather, one of the most startling scenes in the movie was reduced to a blink-and you'll miss it moment. The 8th number. Centauri's star vehicle appeared to be lifted directly from pulp sci-fi on screen. Futuristic, sleek, and glossy. It was a nightmare on set, though. The car was shamefully slow, clumsy, and noisy. Crews struggled to get it going in a straight line each time it needed to make a big arrival. The fiberglass body shook, the gaudy gullwing doors jammed, and what appeared to be effortless speed on film was frequently a patchwork of precise camera angles and editing techniques. Later on, Nick Castle acknowledged that using the automobile to film was more frustrating than enjoyable. Although it was designed for the big screen, the cosmic hot rod was hardly fit for the road. A reminder of the charm of The Last Starfighter. Brilliant in concept, awkward in practice. One individual, Robert Preston, was the inspiration for number 9, Centauri, the cunning recruiter who entices Alex into the stars. He was well known to audiences as Harold Hill from The Music Man, a blustery salesperson with a gleam in his eye. In essence, Centauri was Hill reincarnated in space, a con artist who became a cosmic advisor. It was a unique position for Preston. It turned into his last theatrical performance, a stardust-wrapped curtain call. The final Starfighter had a heartbeat thanks to his charisma and theatrical timing, which grounded the CGI show with classic Hollywood charm. It wasn't just a character leaving when Centauri drove off in his ostentatious star car. The final bow from a Broadway icon recast as a salesperson amid the stars was Preston's farewell. Goodbye, Alex. Enjoy yourselves. 10. Wil Wheaton nearly made his debut in The Last Starfighter before he became the next generation of Wesley Crusher on Star Trek. He taped a few lines that hung around Alex Rogan's world while playing Lewis's pal in the trailer park. However, almost all of his scenes were cut when the film came out. Wheaton was reduced to a background kid who was hardly perceptible unless you knew where to look. Although his family made fun of him for being technically in the film, the big break never materialized. After 2 years, Wheaton got Star Trek and then Stand By Me. In the end, the child who got lost in the editing room became a sci-fi legend. Evidence that the responsibilities you don't get recognized for can occasionally serve as stepping stones to the ones that transform your life. 11. The arcade game was the only thing that children in 1984 were fantasizing about as they flooded out of theaters. On TV, Alex Rogan had shot to fame after winning the Starfighter cabinet. They undoubtedly believed that an actual machine must be waiting in bowling alleys and pizza parlors. Atari created functional prototypes, complete cabinets with flashing controllers, and gameplay that imitated the space conflicts in the movie, even hinting at it in the credits. However, before the dream could reach the arcade floor, it died. Atari was severely damaged in the 1983 video game crash, and the release was cancelled. Fans chased rumors of a game that never existed for years after the prototypes vanished into warehouses. 6 years later, a NES cartridge bearing the final Starfighter moniker was eventually released. However, the cruel prank was really a reskin version of another game called Uridium, not the epic dogfights the children had dreamed about. No chance to test your luck, no arcade rollout, just a phony console tie-in and an urban legend. It turned into one of the biggest disappointments in film history for gamers, a glowing promise that was never kept. Alex Rogan's robotic doppelganger, the Beta unit, was never intended to be more than a passing joke. As the real Alex battled in the stars, a clumsy Stan-alike struggled through small-town life. However, test viewers liked Beta's clumsy humor when they viewed early cuts. His odd grin, his unsteady gait, the way he attempted and failed to imitate human behavior. It always made people laugh. The filmmakers paid attention. They added fresh sequences to Beta's role. It was a victory for the audiences. It was agony for Lance Guest. He had already cut his hair by the time reshoots came around, so he had to wear a stiff wig that didn't look good in the light. Heat was trapped by the thick, heated prosthetics until he almost passed out. The fact that Guest was ill for a large portion of the shoot made every day spent in that latex feel like punishment. Beta was a beloved oddity and comic relief on screen. He was rubber and anguish behind the scenes. As evidence that what makes us laugh on screen frequently originates from someone else's suffering, Guest subsequently joked that Beta almost broke him. Lewis, go back to sleep, or I'll tell Ma about your playboys. Alex, you're blowing it. What the fuck? Lewis, go back to sleep, or I'll tell them everything about your playboys. 13. Not all of the time were Alex and Maggie. They were referred to as Skip and Penny in early drafts, which made them sound more like cartoon characters than actual teenagers. Nick Castle, the director, detested it. The story didn't seem like a campy comic strip to him. It was about two regular youngsters who were put in exceptional situations. He advocated for names that were more realistic and more true to the small-town trailer park environment. The modification was successful. It sounded as though you could know Alex and Maggie. Children you may see at a corner cafe or gas station. Their names served to ground the fantasy in reality by serving as a reminder to viewers that this was still a tale of two small-town dreamers falling in love beneath the CGI dogfights and alien battles. On number 14. The final Starfighter nearly had the most unique studio logo in Hollywood history thanks to one audacious proposal. The filmmakers intended to use Rylos, the alien planet at the center of the narrative, as the opening instead of Universal's iconic globe. The goal was to immerse viewers directly in space, obfuscating the distinction between the studio and the film's environment. However, Universal bosses objected. They were concerned that it would violate one of the most important branding guidelines by confusing audiences. Don't ever alter the logo. The movie ended up opening with Earth instead of the original idea. It's a small hypothetical scenario, the kind of artistic whimsy that would have solidified the film's alien atmosphere from the very first scene. Rather, the movie was cautious, letting Rylos come out among the stars later. The final Starfighter's legendary starship, number 15, the Gunstar, was unlike anything viewers had ever seen in 1984. Created by the innovative artist Ron Cobb, who had previously influenced Back to the Future, Conan the Barbarian, and Alien. Unlike the ships from Star Wars, it wasn't assembled from model parts. It was entirely designed and created on a computer. Cobb's design was ideal for the digital canvas because it lent towards sleek angular symmetry. The Gunstar, a ship made of polygons rather than glue and plastic, seemed like the future when it was depicted in the computer-generated imagery scenes of the movie. Alongside the X-Wing, it became one of the first genuinely digital emblems of cinema for fans. As well as the Millennium Falcon. The Gunstar fought its way into film history, not merely in a cosmic conflict. 16. The Last Starfighter surged with Tron's DNA. Many of the visual effects artists brought their digital skills to Universal after recently participating in Disney's groundbreaking 1982 experiment. The appearance of Rylos and its alien armadas was also influenced by unutilized alien concept ideas that infiltrated the mix. The Last Starfighter's unique style was derived from this heritage. Shiny, somewhat weird, and reminiscent of an arcade. It did not resemble the grim, inhabited world of Star Wars. It appeared to be a video game come to life. Something you could practically play. Although such decision caused controversy at the time, it now solidified the film's distinct identity. Star Wars was not the goal. It was something decades ahead of its time, something brighter and weirder. You have a small and dispersed following. League of Stars. A haven for weaker worlds and a willingness to treat us on an equal footing. 17. The Last Starfighter received the same treatment from Marvel Comics as Labyrinth, Blade Runner, and Raiders of the Lost Arkansas. Marvel brought the plot of the movie to life in vibrant, bold panels in a 3-issue adaptation that was released in 1984. After the film came out, it was the only chance for a lot of fans to recreate the adventure. The adaptation lent on the pulpy, cosmic flavor that Marvel thrived on, incorporating Ron Cobb's sleek ship designs and even prolonging several scenes. The miniseries eventually turned into a collectible relic of sci-fi marketing from the 1980s, serving as a reminder of how comic book stores once carried the torch for movies that weren't yet available on VHS. It seemed appropriate that the film's afterlife existed in a different medium where creativity could run wild, given that it was based on arcade DNA. I need an ear job now. I'm dying right here. What's happening? It's a horrible nightmare you are experiencing. Return to your sleep. Lewis. 18. Universal desired their own Star Wars to be the final Starfighter. The studio envisioned a vast retail empire, toys, and sequels. Prototypes were drawn, tie-in goods were planned, and strict standards were set. However, the box office failed to produce the massive figures that management were hoping for. The movie made $28.7 million globally, more than double its $15 million budget. However, it appeared to be a little adjustment in comparison to George Lucas' Empire. Plans for merchandise failed, toys disappeared before they could be produced, and the anticipated franchise faltered. Despite its lofty goals, The Last Starfighter was unable to shake the lingering effects of Star Wars. It was a cult tale just waiting to be unearthed, not a galaxy-dominating empire. The Last Starfighter initially appeared doomed to disappear. It was a small sci-fi oddity in the crowded summer of 1984, but it wasn't a flop either. Then came cable and VHS. Reruns late in the evening. Those who were unable to see it in theaters found it at home, where they relived the arcade-style fights, recited Robert Preston's witty one-liners, and dreamed of winning big scores that would alter their life. It progressed from forgotten experiment to cult classic by the 1990s. It wasn't just another science fiction movie to many. They were persuaded by the film that computers might create universes as vast as their imaginations. In the long run, The Last Starfighter prevailed, but it never won at the box office. Enduring in the light of VCRs, TV screens, and the hearts of the fans who discovered it there. 20. Not on screen, but on stage, The Last Starfighter had an unexpected encore 20 years after its premiere. The interstellar adventure was reinvented as a campy, full-fledged musical by Storm Theater in New York in 2004. The production capitalized on the film's pulpy appeal with chorus songs that echoed arcade bleeps, duets about fate, and interstellar ballads. Although it wasn't a Broadway giant, it didn't have to be. Fans saw the musical as evidence that the final Starfighter had established a cult following that was capable of transcending genres. Previously, the gunsters' fights had been depicted using state-of-the-art computer graphics. As a strange yet poignant reminder that the film's imagination was too vast to remain limited to a single medium, they were now sung under spotlights. How do we proceed? We pass away. Well-known people like Seth Rogen and Steven Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment were interested in the idea, but studio hesitancy and legal issues kept it on the ground. Pitch ideas and scripts were developed, but nothing was approved for release. Fans, however, never gave up hope. The Last Starfighter seems like a strong contender at a time of innumerable reimaginings, a cult classic with nostalgic appeal and cutting-edge computer graphics that is just waiting to complete the work that 1984 began. Even though Alex Rogan never made it back to the Gunstar on screen, the dream lives on. The cockpit is kept warm by every new pitch and rumor. One of the earliest movies to demonstrate that computers could create worlds as realistic as models in matte paintings was The Last Starfighter, which started out as a daydream in an arcade. It featured close calls, nearly James Cameron and Michael J. Fox, and it forced through brittle technology that might have failed at any moment. It bid farewell to Robert Preston's Stardust and delivered sci-fi enthusiasts a cult classic that was resurrected on late-night replays, VHS, and cable. The next Star Wars was never it. Perhaps, though, that was the purpose. Because it was stranger, smaller, and more resilient, it was unforgettable. This was for you if you've ever sat at an arcade machine and wished it was more than just a game. Leave a comment. Let us know which cult masterpiece we ought to start with next. Because a screen may not always display the highest score. It is the legacy that a story creates.